Hello, everyone in the
Hello.
internet. They'll hop on in a second, but we won't wait. We'll just get started because there will be replays. This will be posted on Facebook, YouTube. Join us out there. Awesome, guys. So today we are here to talk about building a legacy, estate plan to last generations, why it's important, any history. Portia stays coming with stats about everything, so she's going to break it down for us. Awesome. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So my name is Michelle Morton. I'm a licensed realtor, DC, Maryland, Virginia, luxury and legacy, helping people build, create generational wealth through real estate and entrepreneurship. That's why this was the perfect panel. You guys have heard me talk about my estate planning attorney friends before, so now you get to meet them. Awesome. So welcome. Okay, Stacy, we'll have Stacy. Stacy's my friend. She's my accountability partner in real estate. So she's going to introduce herself. And while we introduce ourselves, let's tell us a little bit about why it's important to build a legacy. What does that mean to you?
So I am Stacy Turnage. I am licensed in the state of Oklahoma, but focus on the Tulsa metro surrounding areas, and been in the industry since 1993, just doing it from a different perspective. Have a solid mortgage banking background and did foreclosure for Goldman Sachs. So what legacy and wealth building is for me, or what it looks like for me, is to have something that will continue once I'm dead and gone. Like for my kids to take over, for my grandkids to take over, and just kind of ensure that they have a great foundation and a great springboard after I'm gone.
Awesome. So a big part of it for you is about the next generation.
Correct. Absolutely.
Awesome. Welcome, Portia Wood. Portia Wood Esquire, please introduce yourself, my friend.
Hi, you guys. My name is Portia Wood. I am a generational wealth planning attorney. Building a legacy is really important to me because it is the foundation upon which the next generation gets to sort of continue to build, right? What we do today, what our grandparents have done for us, and so on, has laid the foundation. And when they have done a great job, it's allowed us to catapult. You guys can hear my baby in the background. But no, this idea that in the Black community specifically, we're constantly starting over from scratch instead of building upon the shoulders upon which our previous generation has started, we aren't building successful legacies. And so I think it's really important and impactful to have these kinds of conversations to talk about what it means to build a legacy and what it looks like and how we can do it, particularly through real estate. So thank you for having me.
Boom. And Portia, what's also really cool is you and your mom, you guys are in business together. You know, a lot of your family, you guys own properties together. So in that whole familial aspect of building a legacy, she is a true testament to that. So woo-hoo. Awesome. Delana, sorry, I was coming to you first for the disclaimer. Delana's going to give us a disclaimer.
I'll give my introduction and then I'll give everyone the little disclaimer here. So my name is Delana Barbie. I'm the founder and managing attorney of Barbie Law Boutique, where I help primarily service providers, creative entrepreneurs to protect and build their businesses and legacies that we've been using today. And I do that through providing assistance in the areas of strategic legal counsel for business, trademarks, and of course, estate planning, which we're here for today, because, you know, as people are creating these businesses, creating the potential for legacies, we want to be sure that they're also adequately protecting what they're building during their lifetime. So love doing that. Thank you so much, Michelle, for having me here today. Just wanted to give the disclaimer that all the information that you're going to hear today is just for your informational purposes only, just for you to be educated on the subject. We are not giving any legal advice today. We cannot do that, obviously, in this forum. And so we are not your lawyers. We would suggest that, you know, from this discussion, if you hear things that you like, you should probably go ahead and either contact one of us. I'm licensed in both Connecticut and Massachusetts. Contact one of us or contact another attorney in your state to be able to assist you with your planning. And then to the point of why legacy is important to me. So legacy to me is extremely important because first, it helps kind of what we were saying here for our next generation not to have to start from scratch. But also one of the things that sometimes gets lost is supporting charitable institutions that we care for and that we want to be around for the long haul. And that is something that can also be done through proper estate planning. So just wanted to throw that out there as two of the reasons why legacy is very important. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Delana. So trademarks, intellectual property, those are some of the places that you also practice outside of planning estates.
Yes.
Awesome. Carmen, thanks for joining us, Carmen.
Thank you so much for having me. Hi, my name is Carmen Rosas. I am an estate planning attorney, the managing attorney of Carmen Rosas Law in California. And I also am the founder of Empower Yourself, where we have, we provide legal and financial do-it-yourself options for people who may not be able to necessarily afford a full-on estate plan. And so intro, right? And then why legacy? So I'm I'm a first generation here in California. My dad is from Mexico. I'm the only attorney in my family. And for me, that's been super huge. And so I think something that Portia touched on is that, you know, people like women of color, especially, right? We're trying to play this catch-up game. And for me, it's super important that we build the foundation now, you know, when we can. And so legacy is super important for me, especially because being from an immigrant family, so many people come to the to the US with this American dream, and they work so hard for what they have. And then for them to find out they have to go through probate court, or they can potentially lose so much of their money to the courts and the system is actually devastating. And so that's kind of why I'm here to push, legacy planning. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Carmen. Thanks for sharing your story. So next we're going to talk a little bit about generational wealth, right? Because you hear these buzzwords kind of going hand in hand. Everyone's throwing them out there. So, we all touched on how it has to do with our children and those that come before us. What do you define, or how do you describe generational wealth? And anyone can take it.
This is such a loaded one, I would say, in terms of what generational wealth can mean for people. Some people think that generational wealth means you're leaving millions of dollars, and that's the only thing that can be considered generational wealth. But when I think of generational wealth, I think it's just, giving someone a little leg up. That's what I'm thinking, just a little leg up, whatever you can do in your lifetime. And so for some people, they're not going to have a ton in their estate when they are no longer here, when they transition out of this world. But that's okay. Whatever it is that they can plan for during their lifetime to leave, that little bit gives someone an edge up. And so it doesn't have to be a ton. Don't think that, and it's great if you do have a ton, but if you don't, that's also okay. That's one thing that someone doesn't have to worry about. And when we don't do proper estate planning, particularly for people who may be lower income, then what it is that you have left over then gets lost. That bit that you worked so hard for gets lost. And so I would say that estate planning for people of all incomes is equally as important. And so when you're thinking of generational wealth, think about it in the sense of that one leg up.
Love it. That's powerful. We call them tweetables around here. That's a tweetable. Something that's going to give you one leg up. I mean, that's critical. You don't have to be wealthy to leave generational wealth, right? It's not about, I always use this statement, it's not about popping bottles and, buying fancy things. Those are nice. We like nice things, but it's really about giving someone a leg up. I love that.
I think also generational wealth could be fine to kind of piggyback on that is to leave a generational wealth mindset, right? Because a lot of times we are a product of what our mindset is, and mindset is the driver. So if your family's mindset is merely just about survival, those things are passed down generationally, right? It's about changing the mindset. And for me, that's where I'm at with my children, is changing the mindset. My father transitioned about 4 years ago and left the family a business. And I moved back home to run that business, and we're gearing up to go after another big contract. So that is a generational wealth mindset. My parents got it late in life because my grandparents, my grandfather owned his own businesses. But when my parents were growing up in the 60s, it was about get you a good government job, get on at Ford Motor, get on at the post office. And they lost that. Well, as my mom retired and my father began to work on his own, they created this amazing company that when he transitioned, I had to come back home to run. So we're gearing up to go after another really big contract. And that was a mindset, right? Because my mom now would she's like, I retired and I've never looked back. And I don't want any of you guys to have to work for someone else. So generational wealth and generational legacy could also be mindset.
100%. I mean, in our office, we say it all the time. Wealth is not just the economics. It's the knowledge. It's the why. It's the wisdom. It's, why did you get up and work so hard? Why was it so important to own real estate? All of those pieces help the next generation, whether they be your kids or your family members or just your godkids or people, that come after you, that see you, that you impact, knowing the shoulders that they stood on. Right. And I talk about this all the time. I sometimes on Clubhouse, right. Where, my great grandfather founded the Afro-American newspaper. And a lot of people know that story. And a lot of people have told his story because it's written down. Right. And we live in a patriarchal society. But what most people don't know about that story is that he actually got the funding for that paper from his wife. And his wife got that money from a piece of property she inherited from her father. Right, bring it back to property and legacy. Her father was a slave, and he is the presumed son of the slaveholder. The slaveholder passed away and left in his estate plan 600 and something acres in Montgomery County to his nieces. My great-great-great-grandfather bought his own freedom from his aunts, then bought the freedom of his wife and all of his children, then bought the 600 acres from them. When he died, he left his own estate plan that divided that parcel up equally. And my grandmother, due to their estate plan, had to sell to a family member and sold her portion to her brother. Took that money, and we now have the Afro, which is the longest continuously running Black newspaper in the country, family-run Black newspaper in the country at 129 years. When we talk about legacy and we talk about opportunity, we know the whys behind why they did these things. We know that the paper exists and continues to exist because it's about being of service to the community. It's about nobody telling our stories. And when I think about how I operate my business, those same values translate. I can't turn and do something different. That would be turning against generations of my family. So the legacy element is still, who is the family and who do you come from and why? Why do they work so hard? For us to exist today, 4,000 ancestors came before us. How did they get here? So I think really that's the legacy. That's the generational wealth, and money always flows from that.
Oh, and money always flows from that.
Beautiful story, by the way. I'm so glad that I got to hear that. That's amazing. And I just wanted to add in really quickly about, similar to what Stacey said about the mindset, right? Because I feel like I'm just now learning it. Like when I hit 30 and I started doing, my own personal development and spiritual journey. And I feel like that was when I realized I don't have to, bust my butt and work like a horse and do all of these hard things. And I can do what I love and I can make money like, the white man can, like the patriarchy, and it's okay. Right. And so a lot of that is, working through that mindset and then sharing it with the community, right? Because it goes on even just beyond just our kids, our, grandkids, our direct, descendants, but we can then share it with the rest of the community who may not have people right above them or at their level that are able to explain this mindset shift, right? And then also, right, it's not about, there's a meme out there, right, that it's like Gucci, Prada, Louis Vuitton, and then I'm like, I want assets, LLCs, right, real property. And so I think that it's shifting that where it's like, yes, maybe red bottoms and like fancy bags are great, but it's the longer living assets, right, that can continue on or investing, right? Because it doesn't necessarily just need to be real estate, which is, I think, and when people come in, real estate is usually the one thing they're like, I don't have very much. And I'm like, you live in California, your house is worth $1 million. Like, that's a lot. And I was like, and the probate is like 5%. So that is a lot. Like you are passing on more than just your little house that, you raised your kids in or you raised your grandkids in. It goes beyond even like just the sentimental value of it. So just my 2 cents.
As a fellow Californian, I 100% agree. People always walk in and they're like, I really don't have anything. I just have this little house. Oh, you just have this $1 million house that's paid off. And like, you've got really low property tax rates. And like, aside from Prop 19 being a more complicated problem, you can pass this $1 million asset that can rent for like $7,000 a month at a like $2,000 a year tax rate to your beneficiaries, and you don't have anything. You've got a lot. And let's
Well, and I think that speaks to the mindset, right? Because we all know that $1 million house in California is only about 1,200 square feet, right? So we know it's a tiny house, and if you live in
786 at this point.
right? So you think of it as your little house, your little abode, but you don't look at the dollars and cents of it and how it could catapult your family into, a story like you have, Portia, of a legacy of a newspaper or a janitorial business, which is what we own. And my parents, worked, and my mom cleaned buildings when she retired and created that for us. So I think it's mindset. People think that little bitty matchbox, and it trips me out that it is $1 million, but I've lived in California and I understand it. Because girl, $1 million here gets you a couple acres. Matter of fact, I've been trying to talk Michelle into moving to Tulsa, but that's a whole nother issue. But it's mindset. It's what we think is, oh, that's not that much. But it really is, because they haven't made the mind shift and they don't understand it being as big as it really is, or as big as it could be.
I think it's also the education aspect, right? There's the mindset, but there's also the education. You don't know what you don't know. And, we see battle that a lot when it comes to estate planning. And Carmen and Delana, I think you guys might experience this too, where people come in and they're like, I think I just need a little will. Because there isn't that education around what is comprehensive estate planning and why is it valuable, right? Mm-hmm. What is the point? Is it just to say where your stuff goes, or is it to allow a sort of bubble of protection, if you will, around what you've created, so that when it goes to the next generation, they don't get to squander it, or they're not going to lose it, or they're not going to have these interferences on their wealth that allows them to keep building it up and up and up on each generation. Most people aren't thinking that way.
And I have a question for the attorneys on the panel. Is it a time to start? Because I think, again, that's education. People think, I have this little house and I go to work every day, right? They think, oh, I don't have enough to estate plan, right? So it's never too late, but how soon should someone begin to think about truly estate planning?
I tell people when they turn 18. The moment you turn 18 and become an adult, right? That's something I'm going through now with a lot of my clients. Their kids are going off to college, have just turned 18. And once you're 18, you're an adult, right? Your parents no longer get to have access to all the medical financial information. So they want to run up a credit card. They want to run up loans. They want to do all of that. They're allowed to because they're legally of age, right? And so I say it's never too soon. And even people who, like going back to the house and the mindset, it's people like, well, I don't own it. The bank owns it. And I'm like, you own it. Your name is on the title. We're going to go with title here for purposes of real estate and estate planning. And so some people will say, well, I just, I have like a kid. I don't have a lot of stuff. I don't even own property, but my plan is. And I'm like, well, if you have minors, right, we can use the trust or a full estate plan to set it up so that it's already there and you just add to it, right? You're building and working towards those goals. Or it's, if they haven't purchased a home, you don't need to have a home to have an estate plan, right? It can be bank accounts, it can be investments, right? Because there's a big, kind of a trend going around, right? It's the financial independence where you're not really buying a home. Like maybe you're just buying, investing in real estate. And so it's just like starting earlier rather than later, because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, right? You can be in an accident at 18, 21, 35, 50, and can be, incapacitated, right? That's the term that we use. And I know the question was, what is an estate plan, right? And it's a accumulation of documents, right? It's not just a will. It's not just a trust. It's advanced healthcare directives from medical decisions. And I'll just give an intro. That way you all can pitch in. But it's, the healthcare directives, power of attorney. So creating documents that allow you to protect yourself, your assets, and your family upon incapacitation. And then also coupling that with, say, a will or a trust. that will further allow you to protect your family upon death, right? So you're covered across the board. And then obviously there's supplemental documents, but an estate plan is just a bunch of legal documents that protect you and set your intentions and your wishes out for your loved ones when you do pass.
Carmen, thank you so much. I have a question for you. Really quick. Health directive. So you spoke about that. Again, people think money when they think of trust and stuff. What is that, and why do people need it? What does it protect? How does it protect them?
An advanced healthcare directive essentially allows you to appoint someone to make medical decisions if you cannot or unable to. It also allows them to dispose of your remains, right? If something happens to you, sometimes, right? I'm thinking of a situation that I just had with a client where there were 4 siblings. Only one was named as the authority to dispose of the remains in whatever manner. The other ones wanted to cremate, one wanted to bury, but we had, the advanced healthcare directive that allowed that one sibling to make the decision based on the intentions of the deceased parent. So advanced healthcare directive allows for medical decisions. Also, right, if you're in a car accident, you can't decide what treatment you want done. You can't let the doctor know, yes, let's go with this, or, no, I'm completely against blood transfusions. Some people have religious objections. And so the advanced healthcare directive will essentially put those wishes in place and make it a legally binding document.
Perfect. Okay, let's move on a little bit. Let's talk about real estate. So ladies, what would you give as examples or advice? Of course, this is not legal advice, but to the general public, give us some stories or some examples or how real estate is really can be affected with or without having an estate plan.
Yeah, so in California specifically, and almost across the country, real estate is a probatable asset. You need to get the title transferred. So essentially, if you have passed away or you are incapacitated, nobody has the legal authority to transfer title to your asset anymore. The only institution that has the authority, if you haven't designated through an estate plan, is the court system. And so when you pass away, if it's in your name, the court is the entity that has to transfer it out of your name. They've got to certify who the beneficiaries are, who is legally able to benefit from that property, and then they can transfer title. One of the beauties of having an effective estate plan, a comprehensive effective estate plan, in this instance would be a trust, is that you've transferred title during life. And so you, while you have capacity and ability, have transferred title to the property to the name of your trust that dictates how it flows. And there becomes no need for court to transfer because it's no longer in your name. It's in the name of your trust. You've already planned your succession. You've already said who's legally authorized to step up and transact. And so the court has no role. And that's really the power, because when you think about, Carmen, you can attest to this, right? You can look at the probate calculator and see gross value of my estate is $1 million. My attorney's fees are going to be approximately $24,000. My executive fees are going to be approximately $24,000. We're looking at about $48,000 just from the probate calculator alone. That's not the court fees. That's not the probate referee fees. That's not publication and bond. That's nothing else. And so, when we think about the economic loss that comes along with that, particularly in minority communities, right? Particularly, again, in Black communities, we see that, something of an unrestricted inheritance lasts for about 3 to 5 years upon receipt. And so we're seeing it squandered. We're seeing it sold. We're seeing the unique complications that exist within our community, which I guess I can go into later. But the unique complications that exist in our community where people have restitution issues from, 30 years of the war on drugs. And we've got people who have child support issues, and we have people who have, drug addiction issues and untreated mental health. And so we haven't protected the wealth well. And then we see large losses, 30, 40, 50% of wealth, if not more, being lost by not having an estate plan. And the triggering piece really being that piece of real estate, because it has to go through the court process.
Yeah. And can I just add, so in talking about, right, especially in minority communities, or what we would consider, maybe consider like for lower income families who their biggest asset is the home, right? And if they do need to go through probate, if they had the cash, like liquid cash, say 50,000 sitting in their bank account, plus, I need to add, because I'm working on a probate that's been about 3.5 years now, and I am over it. I was like, I never want to touch a probate case again. But the accounting fees, right, is that accounting fees can add up. And, the administrator's like, well, why are the accounting fees? And I was like, that's what the CPA is charging. We needed fiduciary to do this accounting. But if you don't have liquid assets, right, you don't have that 50,000, say 75, if we're going to get realistic on $1 million property, you then will have to sell that property, right? And it may have been your childhood home, or your great-great-grandmother may have purchased it and it was able to pass down. But if you don't have the liquid cash and assets, you're not going to be able to hang on to the real estate, which especially in California, right, is continuously growing and, increasing in value.
Absolutely. Right. And Michelle, we talk about it. We talked about it in your room, approximately 40% of African-American families own their own homes, compared to about 72% of Caucasian families similarly situated. And, real estate in and of itself has been something that we have been systematically sort of barred from, right? We had redlining, we had, our service members who earned the benefit of the GI Bill being denied access to the GI Bill, being denied access into neighborhoods that saw great appreciation. The majority of wealth in the middle class is held in home equity. And, minority communities, particularly Black communities in this country, have been systematically and governmentally denied access. And so for the people who have been able to attain wealth, or at least property ownership, typically it was in communities that saw zero investment, or actually a disinvestment in the infrastructure around them. And so for the last few decades, hadn't seen really much growth, right? But now, particularly in places like Inglewood, South LA, South Central, right, you have this huge boom where people bought properties for $10,000 and $15,000, and now they're worth $800,000, $900,000. But the family has been sort of systematically destroyed, right? The war on drugs has taken people from the homes. We've got grandparents raising grandkids. And not to say that that's bad, it's just not easily accounted for under the law, which requires a proactive approach to preserving those assets. And if they don't, they can lose what can be, the goose that lays the golden eggs for generations to come. One paid off $1 million house, you can leverage, right? You can take a mortgage out. You can put tenants in there that pay that mortgage, and the family gets large chunks of money every 15 years to be able to invest in more real estate, to buy businesses, to go to college without debt, to, all of these opportunities rely on having the asset and properly protecting it and knowing how to leverage it. And that's what's missing, right? That the educational piece about how to use these properties and how to protect them is really what's missing. But the economic loss of not having an estate plan, to your point, right, is everything. It's the ability to pass generational wealth, and it's the difference between passing generational wealth and starting over from zero.
And I mean, it's known that those who have to start, we should not have to start over every generation, right, as communities. And that's where the downfall is. So let's talk a little bit about a lot of our viewers are either first-time home buyers or aspiring home buyers or family people who, kind of like we've talked about before, feel like, oh, this just really isn't for me. To Carmen's point, to Portia's point, even to Stacy's point about getting started early, what does that look like? I just bought my first house. Where do I go from here?
Yeah, I think even before you buy your first house, right? For those people who are thinking about it, really the conversation is, what do I want if something happens to me, right? If I get hit by a car, if I get COVID-19 and I get severe disease, we're still in the midst of a global pandemic, right? Even though we're opening up. But, if that happens, who takes care of me? Because if I put all of my money into this asset, into a down payment in the real estate market out here, or everywhere really, is crazy. But, if I put all of my money over there and something happens to me, well, how does that mortgage get paid? That mortgage was dependent on me working and providing, having this income to be able to pay for that. Well, am I going to now lose this asset because I got ill and now somebody's in court and there's, my assets are tied up and nobody can get access? You've got to have a plan from the beginning. And what I really appreciate is that a lot of mortgage companies, or at least a few here in California, have been requiring at least a will for people as a part of the process. Now, a will, as we know, is insufficient, right? Because it still requires court interference. But they're requiring at least some level of that, as well as some life insurance for those who qualify. So, they're really starting to make that a condition so that A, they don't get the properties back because they don't want that, and B, that they know where they go without too much hassle.
Awesome. Delana or Carmen, did either one of you want to chime in on, first time home buyer? I know Carmen says when you're 18, that's when you should just get started. What are your thoughts, Delana?
Yeah, so the reality is that although we say 18, a lot of people don't do it until they start getting things. So certainly when you're getting your first home, as Portia was mentioning, that's a really important time to buckle down and get your planning done if you haven't already. But I did want to say some things that come up because sometimes people think that they've planned when they haven't planned outside of the estate plan. And just a couple of examples. One is, oh, I put everything in my kids' names, or I have this property that I put in my kids' name. And they're like, so I'm all set. Not thinking, well, what happens if something happens to your kid, or you're relying on your kid's financial future to be reliable and that everything will go well with them financially and that your house won't get taken or your rental property won't get taken. So you're relying on that. You're relying on them not to sell it or something because now they have full control over it to do everything that they want. So that's commonly one thing that I have heard and seen, that people will say, well, just giving it to my kid, I already put it in my kid's name, I'm all set. And that's not really getting their proper estate planning done. The other thing is, well, my spouse will get it. And also assuming that your spouse is not going to go before you, also assuming that something's not going to happen to both you and your spouse at the same time. Also assuming that, if your spouse gets remarried, what does that look like? There's a lot of things that they're not considering in their estate planning. So by just saying, hey, I put it in someone else's name is not sufficient estate planning. And that's not even including the whole part of if something happens to you when you're disabled and unable to make your own decisions.
Right? Or the tax implications.
Yeah.
You start thinking about the step up in tax basis, right? How do people preserve wealth? Well, what are the two constants? Death and taxes. What do most people not plan for? Death and taxes. So the people who are constantly starting over for zero are not planning for the two things that are the most inevitable things in all of society that even George Washington has told us are the only inevitable, right? Death and taxes. And so, Delana's absolutely right. When we start to just put things in other people's names, we can create taxable events where there might not be a taxable event because of the inheritance exemptions. And so, if I own a house and I bought it at $10,000, my basis is $10,000. If that property goes up to $1 million, there's technically $990,000 in capital gains. But if it's my primary residence, I'm exempt from that, right? If I sold that property. If I add my child to my deed, their basis is my same $10,000. And if I die, they become the owner. Yes, we've avoided probate. Woohoo, we've avoided court. But what we haven't done is the tax issue. And so when they go to sell it, it's not their primary residence. They pay capital gains tax on $990,000. That's crazy. Right? Because if they had inherited it, they would get a step up in tax basis to the date of death value being $1 million. If they sold it at $1.1 million, they pay capital gains on that $100,000. That's a huge difference. And that's an education piece because people want to protect the assets. They want to make sure that they go to their families, but they don't know how. And so, when we talk about first-time home buyers or people who are thinking about buying homes, get all the information that you can. Be comprehensive, be complete about it, and then get started. You get started. Carmen and Delana are 100% correct. If you are over the age of 18 or you are an emancipated minor, you must have some form of an estate plan. We just don't all need the same estate plan. Right? There are 3 things that I say all the time that everybody needs if you're over the age of 18 or an emancipated minor. 1, your property powers of attorney. In different states, they're called different things. Durable power of attorney, uniform statutory. Where you live, it may be called something different. Talk to an attorney in that jurisdiction. But in general, legally authorizing someone to manage your financial and personal affairs if you can't. If you're in a car accident, if you get COVID-19, if you have a stroke or a heart attack, which, by the way, is on the rise in younger people in minority communities, but that happens to you and you can't pay your own bills, then someone needs to be legally authorized to do so for you. And if they can't, there is no default. Your spouse is not automatically the person who gets access to your separate property account. If they did, you'd see a lot of angry spouses knocking out their rich other spouses, right? Because they'd be like, oh, now I get access to that money they didn't give me access to. No, it would encourage bad behavior. And so they are not automatically your first fiduciary. Neither are your parents. Because while your parents gave you life, at 18, the law said you are on your own. They can still love you. They can still let you come live at home, but they don't get to make legal decisions for you. And so if you don't designate for yourself, what you are saying is that the court is now responsible for deciding who should be in charge of that. And they will continue to watch and charge you every year until you either regain capacity or you pass away, right? And that's because you didn't have one thing. And that, I don't care how much money you have. That is irrelevant to the amount of money in your bank account. The second thing is your healthcare documents, making sure you have designated someone who can make your medical decisions if you are unable to. Who is the person that makes them? Again, your spouse is not automatically your first fiduciary, neither are your parents. And if they disagree, who wins? The courts have already said that they're not going to interfere with that. If you're over the age of 18 or you're an emancipated minor, you have to decide. And if you don't, it can be a long, protracted, expensive court battle over what happens with your health. So the first thing, designating someone to make the decision. The second is giving them the authority to view your medical records, so your HIPAA authorization forms, making sure that they are empowered to make informed decisions about your care, and telling them what you want. Your advanced healthcare directive or your living will. Do you want this experimental treatment? Do you want to be intubated? Do you want to be resuscitated or not in certain circumstances? Let them be your voice. Don't make them try to make those decisions, because we find that then people feel like maybe they killed their family member by pulling the plug too early. Let them know what you want. Those two things that I've just mentioned, healthcare documents and powers of attorney, have absolutely nothing to do with how much money you have. Zero. We didn't talk about money at all. Zero to do with how much money you have, and everything to do with dignity and care of you and how you live, right? If you're unable to talk about it. The third thing, and this is where the differences come in, your distribution plan. How everything you have gets divided, where it goes, how it gets there, and how it continues to flow after you. This will vary. If you've got 10 cents versus $10 trillion, you probably just have a simple will. But if you've got minor kids and you've got life insurance, you probably have a trust. It's individual. If you have beneficiaries who are bad with money, you might need to put spendthrift provisions in. If you've got beneficiaries that are special needs, you need special needs provisions, right? And on and on and on. And the variations are everywhere. We could get in detail. The point being, if you're thinking about real estate, if you own real estate, if you're 80 years old and you've got capacity, or you just turned 18, there is an estate plan that you need. It is likely not the same, but you need it, and you need it today, because you're playing Russian roulette with your life and everything that you're building. Because the idea that we can do it later is this really sort of presumption that God should give us the right to wake up tomorrow and try again. What?
Portia plays no games, y'all.
Audacity. Like, how dare I tell God, oh God, I'm gonna wait till tomorrow, because I know you're gonna let me wake up tomorrow. I know you're gonna let me try again tomorrow and do something that I knew I should have done today.
So I have a couple of questions, or one question in particular regarding the medical directive, Portia. So are you saying, just for clarification, that conversation that you had with Big Mama 2 days ago about the fact if I ever have a stroke and they have to intubate me and I don't want to be resuscitated, and she tells you that she's in her right mind, 48 hours later, we're in that situation, that conversation doesn't even matter either. Is that what I'm hearing you saying?
That's correct. That's correct. I can walk into your office, Stacy, and I can say, Stacy, look, if I ever have a stroke, I want you to do X. And 5 seconds later, I can turn around and walk into Michelle's office and say, if I ever have a stroke, I want you to do Y. And then I have a stroke, and now the two of you are like, well, she told me this. Well, she told me that. No, if you didn't write it down, it does not matter. And not just write it down, but write it down in a legally executed way. Right, because there are formalities, and each state has their own set of formalities. And so some people go, and I had this recently where an older grandmother had been raising her granddaughter. Her granddaughter was doing very well. Her son was incarcerated. He's incarcerated for life, right? Mandatory minimum sentences and crack cocaine and all. Won't get into that part, but the things that have impacted our community. She's raising her granddaughter. And her granddaughter, has launched, and she's like, I want my granddaughter to have my house. And she's like, but why wouldn't it just go to her? I raised her. She's my daughter. She's not. She's your granddaughter, sure, but your son is alive. He's incarcerated, but he's alive. He is your direct beneficiary if you die without an estate plan. And he's incarcerated for life, which means he has restitution issues. He's got state court fees and all of these other things that will attach, plus back child support for the granddaughter you raised, that will attach to your home and then force a sale because there's not enough liquid capital to cover it. And he can't get a refinance because he's in jail. They will force a sale of that property, filter all that money through them, taking their own pieces, and then put it into an account that's left over, and your granddaughter will get none. But people don't know the process. They make assumptions. And it goes back to the first point I was saying, we have to seek out the information and make sure that we are informing ourselves. And then we have to properly execute. Conversations and assumptions are not enough, and they are impacting our community. Approximately 70% of African Americans have zero estate planning at all. There was a study that was done in 2017 that said only 13% of college-educated African Americans passed $10,000 or more to the next generation, which means 87% of us are passing less than $10,000. The average amount passed being around $41,000. Compared to our white counterparts, where the average amount passed is about $163,000 plus. And more than 50%, in fact, 60-something% of them are passing over $10,000, with the average being just shy of $200,000. We don't even pass enough to pay off the tuition at a 4-year state school, right? We're passing negative wealth compared to our contemporaries, who we are then competing in these crazy real estate markets against, right? That are passing enough to pay off the tuition at a 4-year university, assuming there is debt at all, and enough for a down payment on an almost $600,000 house. Both, right? They are passing what is wealth. They're passing the ability to create a wealth system, and we aren't. And where are we missing? $2 billion is lost annually in the probate process across this country, and that's a conservative estimate of how much is lost from estates on an annual basis is $2 billion. And probate, as we mentioned in the beginning, is 100% avoidable with a comprehensive estate plan. It's not necessary. Probate is a default. When people say to me, oh, I don't have an estate plan, it goes, no, you don't have an estate plan. You wrote. You have the state's plan for you, and they're going to charge you. So everybody has an estate plan. Get that out of your mind. You've done estate planning. You've just chosen the state's plan, which costs way more money.
I just wanted to add in, right, is when we talked about, the healthcare directive, right? Of course, like the Terry Schiavo case, that was the one that always comes to mind because it's the most publicized, right? With her parents and her husband and the court battle that ensued. So if you haven't heard of it, don't know it, go Google it. But that was with, the healthcare directive and making medical decisions, and she was on life support and all that fun stuff, right? But the other part is going back to, I think I do a lot with the Latinx community, right? Because I'm a Spanish speaker, and there aren't very many Spanish speaking attorneys, right? Similar to, like African American or Black, attorneys, like our percentage in the legal field is very small. And so I work a lot, with Spanish speakers throughout California, right? Because they want an attorney that can explain this information. But a lot of it's like, oh, it's in my compadre's name, or, oh, it's, in my brother's name because I didn't qualify. So he bought it in his house. And I'm like, yeah, but when you die, nothing happens. When he dies, it's going probably to all of his kids because that's just how it's set up. Right. And so like you all have been saying is like education is so important. So for those of you watching, I commend you for being here. just to get the information. And now you have a starting point, right? And I find that so many people don't even know where to start, right? Is what comes up is like, they're like, I don't know, I feel too overwhelmed. I don't want to talk to an attorney again, because I don't have enough, or, you know, it's not worth protecting. Or the one that gets me the most, 6 kids, they all know what I want done. And I'm like, those 6 kids, when you pass, are going to be at each other's throats. Like, nobody's going to agree. They were being nice because mom and dad were there. Like, yes, people will, there will be issues. You know, some people may end up in jail. Who knows, right? But it's if you don't put it down in a legally binding document, even with guardianship, right? We didn't talk about this, but as part of your estate plan, right, is guardianship. And they're like, oh, the godparents, I already have godparents. And I'm like, that's a religious thing, not a legal thing. Your godparents are not legally bound or legally authorized to go and pick your kids up from school unless there's, you know, some document that you sign, or to take care of them long term. And so it's the education, I think, is so, so important. And so, Michelle, thanks for having us all here to kind of just share more of it. But if it is not written down in an appropriately legally binding document, it doesn't exist. It doesn't matter. Nobody cares. The court and the judge definitely don't care. So get it in writing. Like, I mean, I feel like that's every attorney's advice always, you know, even with, you know, in real estate, get it in contract, right? Get everything in writing and sign it in the appropriate way. So
Especially if you want the refrigerator. Don't assume that
Boom, boom. So that is amazing. All right, guys. So what we're going to do really quickly, we're wrapping up at the top of the hour, but I want to touch on entrepreneurship a little bit, right? We have a lot of entrepreneurs that are watching or will be watching later. And so I know trademarks, intellectual property, business succession plans, like what are the things people need to have in place to make sure that these bags, these checks, these coins they're collecting are protected and passed on?
Yeah, sure. I can speak to that a bit. So the first thing I would say is to make sure that you know you properly plan your business structure as a starting point. It's always great to get professional advice to talk about it when you're first opening up your business so that you can make sure that you're on the right path initially. So when you start a business, let's say, you know, I was going to start my business today, you know, start a cleaning business and I do nothing. I start up as a sole proprietorship. That's the default, right? But what happens if I leave a wet spot, someone slips, falls, then they can potentially sue me. And so there's a lot of overlap between business ownership and thinking about your own legacy and what you have, because you want to properly protect yourself. So someone slips and falls, they sue me and they're successful. Now I might have to give up what I have personally, my personal assets, to the individual. Or let's say me and my buddy decide to go in business together. We just start the cleaning business tomorrow and my buddy leaves the wet spot, someone slips and falls, and then they sue us and successful. I wasn't even there, but yet and still, because I started this partnership, which is a default, with no paperwork, nothing, no business entity, they're able to sue me even though I wasn't there if my buddy has nothing available to them, right? So we want to think about, well, what's the proper business structure for what I'm doing based upon the risk? And for many people, they'll set up an entity like a limited liability company, corporation. Really depends on what your business objectives are and long term and in the short term. But considering a business structure to protect your personal assets from liability is one of the first things you want to think about. The other thing, of course, that you want to think about is tax planning in that, as Portia was mentioning earlier. Tax planning is always important. So depending on your entity structure, depends on what type of tax elections might be available to you to use. You could definitely talk to a tax advisor about what might make sense for you based upon your business. And it may change over time. So you might start as, you know, one type of default, and then later on make some type of tax election for you, depending on where your business goes in the future. The third thing is protecting your brand. And I know I'm going through it kind of quickly because I know we're short on time, but definitely protecting your brand, because now we're talking about intellectual property. We're talking about the ideas from your mind. And I always say that's one of my favorite assets because it's basically free. It's free. Once you come up with it, it's free. It came out of your mind, but it's not going to be free if you don't protect it. You got to spend a little bit to do it, but you do want to protect your intellectual property, because once someone takes it, even if, you know, you might have rights to it, you're now spending legal fees that you did not have to spend to prove that you might have rights to it if you do at that point. So protecting your intellectual property is also going to be a key part of your business structure and thinking about what it is that you want within your business. The other thing is that intellectual property can increase the value of your business. So when you properly have things registered within your business, like your trademark, that can be valuable within your business. So let's say in the future you want to sell. If you have, let's say, different types of trademark assets in your business, but they're unregistered, you just kind of been using them under common law, hoping that you have some rights in them. When someone's trying to buy your business, they're going to consider that. Now they have to figure out, well, whether you really have the rights to use it, and there's going to be a process. Whereas if you have your registered trademarks at that point and someone's looking to buy it, they can rely on that as well. So there's a lot of things to think about in just the foundational aspect of starting your business that in the long term can impact your legacy. And if you didn't do it right away when you started it, for certain, you know, similar to estate planning, get it done as soon as you can. If you already started going and plugging along, meet with someone who can help you with that foundational piece. And I know there's also the succession piece, and I'll let someone else speak to that as well.
Yeah.
Can you give the audience a 30-second synopsis, Delana, on how to protect that intellectual property? Because I come up with ideas all the time and I just think, I'm sure they're not original. So I never think about going to protect them. How do you go about protecting that type of property?
30 seconds. Okay, challenge accepted. Well, the first thing is to have agreements. I know a lot of times when we think about protecting intellectual property, we jump right to, you know, registration of trademarks and copyrights, but agreements are extremely important too. So when you're talking to someone about your ideas, you know, having a non-disclosure agreement that clearly outlines that it's your confidential information, that, you know, no one, that they're not allowed to share it. And if you do allow them to share it, who are they able to share it with? Are they able to share it with their employees? Are they able to share with their contractors as well? You want to make sure that the scope is limited. And then you want to also make it clear that they don't get any rights in the confidential information that you're sharing. So there's a lot of things just at a non-disclosure agreement level that you want to have ready and have someone sign. The other thing is independent contractor agreements or professional services agreements. They're called different things, but essentially it's when an independent contractor is doing work for you, you know, they will likely own that work if you don't have anything in place, anything written and documented that says that they're giving ownership and assigning that ownership over to you. And so you might have this great, let's say this logo, I talked about trademarking. Let's say you have this great logo, right? You came up with the next Nike logo. That's how wonderful it is. But your friend did it and your friend never signed a document to transfer that ownership over to you. You know, you never had that done. And maybe now that your brand is blowing up, they might not want to. They might say they want to own part of it, right? So you want to make sure that upfront, when someone's doing any type of work on your behalf, even if they're a contractor, especially if they're a contractor, you have that professional services agreement, or if you want to call it independent contractor agreement in this case, in place, so that it's clear who owns what in any situation. So that's just the basic fundamental level. The second part would be, depending on what the intellectual property is, because there's trademarks, there's copyrights, there's patents, there's different types of intellectual property, to appropriately register those intellectual property when it makes sense.
Boom.
Can I add on to that real quick, just for independent contractors, right? Also making sure that they are actually independent contractors, because sometimes people will bring in independent contractors, but then treat them like employees, but they don't want to pay employment taxes. And so making sure that you actually have an independent contractor relationship that is right. And really that goes back to talking to people like Delana, like Carmen, like myself, like other attorneys in your jurisdiction, to make sure that you're getting it right. Because if you get it wrong, it is incredibly expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And then Michelle, to answer your question about, or Delania, when we were talking about what is the next step in like business succession, right? Like estate planning, it's like, where do you want your business to go? Who do you want to run it, right? And so there's business succession planning that you can do. There's language that you can put in like your operating agreement or your bylaws, right? Or within your estate plan. So you can set up a business succession plan, right? That works with your estate plan. So your business gets passed on, right? Like for me, I have a lot of clients, a lot of my Spanish speaking clients, they have their own kind of like mom and pop business, right? And they're like, oh, my son's just going to take it over. They're a sole prop. It's like, okay, well, let's set it up so that it can actually pass. Your son knows that you want, most of the time they know that the parent wants to pass it on, right? Depending on the business, but it's making sure that we have all of those documents in place so that by law, they can just kind of go in and it's a smooth transition. There aren't any hiccups. And so with the business succession planning, right, it's really thinking about where do you want your business to go when you're not there? And are you your business, right? For me, I have like paralegals and I have like admin people, but I don't have another attorney in my firm that would take over and do the work that I do, right? So I have to designate another attorney. Well, for my clients anyways, right? I'm doing it for their benefit. So they have someone then to contact in case I'm not around, in case I'm incapacitated, I get in a car accident, right? So I have to make sure that I have a plan as a business owner that my clients and customers are going to continue to be taken care of, right? So that can kind of just continue on with or without me.
The other thing to add to what Carmen was saying is to also, let's say you're working with someone else in your business, is to make sure that your succession plan aligns with your estate plan. So you might have plans for how things are going to get transferred to your family in your estate plan, but if it doesn't say that in your business documents, then it's not going to be aligned. So you want to be sure that you're looking at things completely in a totality, that everything that you're planning for in your estate plan is actually aligning with what your business documents say. So when you're meeting with your estate planning attorney, make sure that you're bringing the business documents that are relevant so that they're taking a look at that. And if something does need to be adjusted in the business documents, you can do so at that time.
And because you told me I was going to be the stats girl, right? So I'll just bring the stats. According to the Family Firm Institute, which did a study on particularly Black business succession, only about 30% of family-owned businesses survive into the second generation. Only 12% are still viable into the third generation, and only 3% of all family businesses operate into the fourth generation and beyond. And much of this is because there is no comprehensive estate planning for how this continues to work, right? Estate planning, business succession planning, all of those pieces. What happens? It's great if you've got two kids and you've got one who's really interested in the business and you set that up in the first generation. But if those two kids each have two kids, now you've got four people who have co-ownership. And what is the structure to support that? Right. There was another study that was done in 2015 that said 64% of business owners over the age of 50 have no formal business succession plan. It's the majority of business owners at that point in time. And so we have to do better. And I know as business owners, people start their businesses because they've got a great idea and then they work those business plans without necessarily putting all of the pieces in place. And this goes back to the educational point, right? We've got to build our financial houses on concrete and with steel. Our foundation is important. And the foundation of any financial house is your estate plan. You can build whatever you want. I do not care. But if you build it on quicksand, it will crumble. No matter how beautiful, palatial, built with golden toilets, I don't care. If your foundation is quicksand, it will fall. And so the most important investment we can make is to secure the foundation. And then whatever we build upon it and expand upon it will be secure, and that will last for hundreds of years.
Love it. I don't care what you're doing right now, where you are in your life, age, income, anything, you need to reach out to an estate attorney today. Foundation versus quicksand, it's a no-brainer. I mean, we don't even really have to describe that anymore, right? We do have a quick question for you ladies. Question, how do you transfer property? They cannot give you legal advice. So the first thing I'm going to say is reach out to an estate attorney, right? But the good questions, I love the questions. How do you transfer property from your name into the ownership of your estate?
So definitionally, like let's start there, right? Like if you own property, it is already inside of your estate. If you are saying, how do you transfer title of your property into your trust? That's a different question. It's going to depend on the type of property. If it is a home, it's likely creating a new deed where you are granting from yourself to yourself as trustee of your trust. It's going to depend on the type of trust you have. If you've got a living revocable grantor trust, it's much easier than if you have an irrevocable trust, or, it depends. But just to give you the idea of it depends, but you would generally create a new deed, and that's the type of deed and how that functions is really going to depend on what kind of trust you have created and what you're trying to do. Cal planning or Medicaid planning, if you're in any other part of the country, then that might also look different as well. And so it depends, but generally it's by changing title to the assets and to the name of your trust. So if it's a bank account or a life insurance, again, it's just changing the title. We hear it in rap songs all the time. And I got to stop saying this because maybe it's wrong, but we do. We hear it in rap songs all the time. It's like, I ain't got nothing in my name. I got it in my mama's name, right? And it's partly right. You don't want anything in your name. You don't want to die with things in your name, because if they're in your name, they have to be transferred out of your name. And if you haven't done that yourself, then there's nobody legally able to do that anymore. And so the court has to become involved. But you don't want to put it in your mama's name, because that's not helpful, right? You want to put it in your trust name. And so the idea is correct. The information was incorrect. But from a conceptual standpoint, if it is in your name, it will likely need to be changed out of your name and likely into the name of your trust. Now, there's short answer. I was like, I could keep talking. I'm sorry. But you also want to make sure that you're transferring assets in the most tax advantageous way. We did have the Secure Act, which passed in 2019, which changed the way retirement accounts can be passed down. And so you may want to look at who your beneficiaries are before you make any of those types of transfers. Again, talk to your CPA, talk to your attorney before you start moving stuff, because you have to work together as a whole. Otherwise, you could transfer something and all of a sudden create a tax liability because you just didn't understand it. And that's not to say anybody couldn't understand, but people do it every day. Talk to the people who do it every day, because there's a lot of nuance.
And I just want to add on to that, right, is that I think that I've had lots of clients, right, in California, we have HECS petitions where I think it's a super important part of estate planning is that you actually fund your trust, which means transferring your assets into your trust name. Because yes, it's great, right? And I refer to a trust as like this treasure box, right? And you hold the key while you're alive, and then you pass it on to your successor trustee. But if you have this beautiful box, with jewels, and all of the things you own are outside of it, and you never actually put it inside in the trust name, it's pointless. So make sure that when you are creating a estate plan, you understand how to, what we call, properly fund that trust, so that you do actually avoid probate and your trust works the way it's supposed to.
Awesome. Thanks, Carmen. Thanks, Portia. Angela says she needs an estate planning attorney. Thanks for joining us and watching, Angela. Portia Wood. So on her IG profile, and she'll give contact information before we work. What is it, Portia? Wood Legal Group? Is that where they find it?
Yep. Wood Legal Group on Instagram. If you guys go into the link in my bio, it is a link tree. You can scroll down. You'll see something that says IFES National Black Estate Planning Attorneys. And there are attorneys and people of color that we are trying to put together across the country. And so it's a great starting point resource. If you cannot find someone in your state or jurisdiction, you can always reach out to me directly, and I can make a connection to someone in your local jurisdiction. But yeah, if you reach out to me on Instagram, you can find it there.
Awesome. And so as we wrap up, first, I want to say thank you, ladies, so much for joining us on this Friday. These are my estate attorney friends. As you can see, they don't just, talk the talk, they walk the walk. They're setting up estates and trusts and all that good stuff, succession plans, trademarks, regularly. This is what they do. I think some of the key points today were, one, get started now, at least have the conversation. 18 and up is when you need to start putting your foundation in place. You do not want to build your legacy on quicksand. As we wrap up, and you ladies kind of, tell us how to find you, what states you represent. Can you also just give a short nugget on, everyone thinks estate planning, they think about death, right? They think end of life. But I am a firm believer that one, generational wealth or a legacy is about life, and it's about life beyond just our experience here. So what are your quick thought on how estate planning is less to do with death and more to do with life?
Well, I would love to speak on that because part of doing the estate plan is also getting other people involved, like the other generation. So once you do your estate plan, you're talking to other people in your family about it. These are conversations that might be happening for the first time just because you're getting your estate plan. So there's this whole other effect of doing the plan because you're talking about it and they're starting to understand like, oh, this is what my mom is doing or this is what my parents are doing, and getting an understanding of that. And then maybe they get their planning done and you're kind of starting just a path. You're starting just from one thing to the next. It's like a domino effect of people starting to think differently. Like Portia said, she's always going to think about what happened in her life because of her family member that left a plan. And now look at where she is now, right? Look at where she is now and how she's preaching about it and talking about it now. Who knows if that would have happened had this not happened years and years and years ago. So we're starting to make a change just by getting our plan done and being able to start to facilitate those conversations. I know for some attorneys, they're willing to have, your family members, your children to come in and talk about it and explain the plan and people's different roles and what they're supposed to do. So it's a great way to start to get the dialogue going in your family and really change everything, change the trajectory of your family just by starting the plan outside of anything that has to do with money, outside of anything that has to do with end of life.
And one thing too that, just to touch on that is that my clients, they'll come in and they're like, I couldn't sleep last night. And just having the conversation of, taking that first step to prepare, they're like, oh, I feel so much better. And their plan's not even done yet, right? Like we're just having the initial conversation and getting their wishes out and they're able to vocalize it and share it with someone. Because I think, right, and now in, especially in communities of color, talking about money and, was so taboo, and death is such a taboo topic, even still within the Latinx community, it's like, well, if I do these documents, I'm going to die, right? There's superstitions, there's cultural things behind it where they don't even want to get started. And so like Delaney was saying is that once we are able to start the conversation, we're then allowed to share it with other people. I have so many children of clients who call me to initiate it because they're like, I heard that I needed this. And I want to help my parents set it up. Right. So the parents will come in and they're like, I don't know what I'm doing here. And so then it's a whole informational process first. And then, going that route. But it's, I think that's just, it's super important that we talk about it more. But it is that part of the living, right? It's like, people say it's like you get so much peace of mind, but you do because it's a subconscious, right? And we can go into mindset and all of that, but it's that subconscious, wheels turning consistently that we don't really think that we're thinking about, but we are, right? And it weighs heavily on our mental health, our physical health, like financial health all around. So the moment you're able to start talking about it and you can get that peace of mind, you'll feel so much better. I joke that my clients, okay, you can go skydiving now. You can go and do all the risk-taking things you want to do with your plan in place.
Yeah. And, much in that same vein, right? It's all about planning. It's all about figuring out why we work every day. Like, what are we doing? What is our goal? What is our purpose? What is our family mission? And, in my family, we have family business meetings. Like we sit around the table and we talk about, what are we trying to accomplish? What is our goal? What is, how are we, operating in the world? And we are all in different spaces, right? Like my little sister is the executive director of Afro Charities. And, my brother does his work and my sister's in Atlanta doing her work. But it's like, how do we support each other? How do we push each other forward? How do we, make sure our dreams are being realized and, doing good every day, right? Your estate plan is a part of that family structure. It's your family legacy. It's your family goals. It's your family ideas. It's what do I want for my family? What are the values that we represent and how do we keep that going? So not just talking about it together, but actually writing it down and letting it live and breathe, right? In our communities, particularly in the African-American community, estate planning is not something that we know about. It's not something that people talk about in school. It's not something you learn about in college. And it's often not even taught in law schools, right? It's not a requirement. In many law schools, it is an elective, which means that not everybody who does, who's an attorney knows anything about estate planning. Just FYI, so your real estate attorney probably isn't the person to call. The thing is, particularly in the African-American community, we were the property that was listed in estate plans. We were the property that was being passed down. And if you were here in the beginning when I was telling the story, my great-great-great-grandfather was passed down. His family, his children were passed down as property in the will of the slaveholder who was also his biological father, right? Which is weird on so many levels, and we're not going to go there. But we were the property that was passed down. And emancipation happened. We've got freedom. People start talking about 40 acres and a mule and everything that transpired since. At no point did anyone say, hey, this is how you keep what you're working for. They said you should buy stuff, right? You should buy a house. That's the American dream, buying a home. Well, no, home ownership and the suburbs became a part of the American dream, around World War I and World War II, right? That was a big push from the federal government for wealth accumulation. And we saw it and we knew that we weren't allowed to be a part of it. And so we sought it out, but we didn't understand the mechanisms. It is not just enough to own the home. It is not just enough to be able to get in. And trust me, I understand how difficult it is for people who look like me to get in. But it's not just enough to get in. You have to keep it. You have to keep it. And it's not just keep it for your lifetime. You have to keep it. And the people who come after you have to understand the value of it, which requires a conversation, and it requires you to know the value of it. So your estate plan is not just what happens when I die. It's how do we live? And how do we live?
Preach,
So,
Portia.
that's what I think about as estate planning.
Yay!
Say amen.
Hallelujah. Yay! Thanks so much, guys. I think this was amazing. Portia, how do they find you if someone wants to contact you?
Yeah, we are Wood Legal Group pretty much everywhere. So woodlegalgroup.com, Wood Legal Group on Instagram, Wood Legal Group here on Facebook as well. And they can always tap in. We do a 15-minute free, sort of introductory, exploratory call to get people's questions answered. We do a lot of education, free stuff on Clubhouse and the Black Trust Fund Kids Club every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Pacific, as well as we do webinars, twice a month, every month, just to get basic information out there. We've got an ebook. We've got a free Clubhouse resource library. Like, literally, please go get as much information as possible. Just reach out. Like, we are happy to help and send you in whatever direction, but start today. Tomorrow's not to anyone. Start today.
Sorry. And I will say, go to woodlegalgroup.com, Wood as in her last name. And there is a $5 ebook or something, and it will help get you started on what to do, where to go, all that good stuff. Carmen, where do they find you, my friend?
Across the board, right? Website, social media, Facebook, Instagram is your legacy protection firm. And so, or if you just Google my name, Carmen Rosas, attorney, you'll find it. But yeah, your legacy protection firm, and then Carmen Rosas Law.
Awesome. And she is very huge in the support for the Latinx community and bilingual, speak Spanish. So do not be afraid. We all have cultural barriers that have us feeling like this isn't for us. Well, hopefully we bust some of those myths today. Delana, how do they find you? How do we find you?
Well, like Carmen, pretty easy to find. BarbieLawOnline.com is the website. If you go there, you can join the email list and you'll get all the updates on any webinars or anything that we're doing there. You can also go to BarbieLawOnline.com/resources. And there I have a resource page with several different resources that you can download for free. You can also access the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Laws of Legacy is the name of the podcast if you want to tune in there. And yeah, we're on Instagram, Barbie Law, Twitter, Barbie Law. You'll be able to find us. Thanks so much for having me.
Yay. So guys, check out that podcast, Laws of Legacy.
Mm-hmm.
Check it out. Awesome. Thanks, Delana. Stacy's my accountability buddy. She is a realtor who doesn't give herself enough credit, operating out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Thank you so much, Stacy. How do they find you?
I am on Instagram as your Tulsa area realtor, and just Google my name, realtor, on Google, and it'll pop up all of my social media. StacyTurnage.realtor is my website address.
Awesome. And thank you, Carla. Carla says, thank you, Carmen, Stacy, Portia, Delana, and Michelle. It's been amazing. Thanks, guys. Bye.